Her heart thundered a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, each gasp for air a raw, desperate struggle. As Julia stumbled, the sharp, sudden crack of a whip slicing through the thick, oppressive silence. It wasn't intended for a recalcitrant beast of burden, but for human flesh, a brutal exclamation point on this desolate stretch of trail winding towards the whispered-about settlement of redemption. The grizzled outrider, a man whose eyes were chips of the vast, unforgiving plains, loomed above her, his presence radiating a chilling indifference as she clutched her pathetically meager bundle. "Get up, girl." He snarled, his breath a noxious cloud of stale whiskey and palpable malice, the scent clinging to the dry air. "Or I'll leave you for the buzzards and coyotes. Ain't got time for stragglers, especially not burdens." His gaze, utterly devoid of human empathy, swept over her, deliberately lingering on the subtle, almost imperceptible swell of her belly beneath the threadbare, faded calico. This encounter, a sickening preview of the frontier's raw, unforgiving cruelty, was a grim overture indeed. The fine, grit-laden dust, already deeply ingrained into the lines sun and sorrow had etched upon her young face, felt less like a transient discomfort and more like a premonitory shroud clinging with chilling persistence. Each agonizing step toward the promise of redemption seemed paradoxically to lead her further into an unnameable, suffocating dread that tightened its coils around her weary spirit. Hope, that delicate, precious bloom she had so carefully nurtured through countless desolate miles, had unmistakably withered under the merciless, glaring sun and the outrider's brutal contempt. When Julia finally haltingly limped into its dusty, unwelcoming embrace, redemption revealed itself as a cruel, bitter irony, a haphazard, grim collection of rough-hewn buildings that clung to the barren, unforgiving earth like tenacious, parasitic weeds, stubbornly refusing to die. Instead of the hoped-for sanctuary, the haven she had desperately, fervently envisioned, she found the imposing, freshly painted facade of Silas Blackwood's Frontier Garment Emporium. Its prominent sign, "Prosperity through honest toil." A grotesque, mocking pronouncement flailing in the wind-whipped desolation. This name, Blackwood's name, would in time become an indelible brand upon her memory, seared there by unimaginable pain and the acrid taste of bitter betrayal. Julia Young, achingly alone, and with a belly just beginning to visibly betray the precious secret of new life stirring within her, possessed little more than the threadbare dress on her back and a fierce, though perilously flickering ember of determination to provide for her unborn child. Silas Blackwood, the Emporium's proprietor, greeted her with an unctuous, almost greasy smile that never quite managed to reach the cold, pale depths of his calculating eyes. They were orbs that seemed to appraise her worth strictly in terms of quantifiable labor and potential coin, nothing more, nothing less. Honest work for deserving women. He'd purred, his voice as deceptively smooth as oiled leather, his penetrating gaze lingering on her evident desperation, like a circling vulture patiently eyeing its inevitable prey, causing a shiver to trace its icy path down her spine. Parched by unrelenting thirst and starved for even the smallest crumb of human kindness Julia had desperately clung to, his offered words willfully, desperately ignoring the faint tremor of profound unease that skittered warnings across her weary mind. The vast, dimly lit main room of the factory hummed and throbbed with the relentless, almost mechanical toil of dozens of women, and their faces etched with a similar bone-deep weariness. Their hands flying over piles of fabric needles glinted like captured sparks in the dim, grimy light, filtering through dust-choked, rarely cleaned windows. They formed a silent, mournful sisterhood of shared hardship, bound together by common suffering and the unspoken, ever-present fears that shadowed their waking hours and haunted their troubled sleep. Days bled into weeks, each one a monotonous, soul-crushing cycle of stitching and sewing, the very air thick and heavy with the acrid, biting smell of harsh chemical dyes, the musk of human sweat, and the coarse texture of cheap, unforgiving cloth that chafed raw skin. The gnawing, persistent ache in her lower back, the constant sharp prickling of her increasingly needle-scarred fingers, the incessant mind-numbing drone of the unseen machines. These became the unrelenting grim soundtrack to her daily existence. Julia managed to forge a tentative fragile friendship with Martha, an older woman, whose face was a veritable roadmap of accumulated sorrows. Martha offered quiet, practical words of advice, and on occasion generously shared her meager rations when Julia's morning sickness was at its most debilitating. Mina. "Keep your head down, child," Martha had whispered one particularly suffocating, stifling afternoon, her anxious eyes darting nervously towards the leering, brutish overseer, a heavy-set, cruel-faced man named Jeb, whose pig-like eyes and perpetually sneering mouth cast a constant shadow of menace over the workroom. Don't draw Blackwood's eye for the wrong reasons. He smells spirit, that one, and he particularly enjoys the breaking of it. And whatever you do, child, don't let Jeb see weakness. Voice low and urgent, he feeds on it like a starved wolf on a fallen lamb. Julia tried. Lord, how she desperately, fervently tried. She worked with diligent, uncomplaining effort, her growing belly a fiercely guarded secret binding her stomach with pilfered strips of spare cloth from the factory's scrap bins, hoping against hope to conceal the undeniable, burgeoning truth for as long as humanly possible. But secrets like water persistently seeping through solid stone have an insidious way of eventually finding their path to the unforgiving surface. It was Jeb who finally, inevitably noticed his predatory eyes lingering on her subtly changing form, with a gleam of smug, almost triumphant satisfaction. He promptly reported her condition to Blackwood, not out of any misplaced concern for her well-being, but with the sickening, sycophantic pleasure of a favored cur, delivering a particularly prized bloodied rabbit to its awaiting master. The summons to Blackwood's private office felt like the ominous tolling of a death knell, each step towards it heavy with impending doom. The room itself was starkly oppressively opulent for the frontier, dominated by a heavy dark oak desk and shelves meticulously lined with ledger books. Countless volumes filled with columns of numbers that coldly represented extracted human labor and the agonizing sum of accumulated misery. Blackwood sat regally behind the imposing desk, his fingers steepled his pale, cold eyes, as unreadable and chilling as winter ice. "It has come to my attention, Julia." He began, his voice deceptively, terrifyingly gentle, "that you are in a delicate condition. Curtly, is this true?" Julia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, threatening to break free from its cage. She desperately tried to deny it, to stammer out some plausible excuse, but the words caught, trapped in her throat, choked by a rising, overwhelming tide of sheer panic. Blackwood's smile was thin, cruel, like a freshly honed razor cut. "This is a place of work, girl. A place of productivity, not a nursery," he stated, his voice like ice. "We have standards. You will become a liability, a drain on resources." His contemptuous gaze dropped pointedly to her stomach, a flicker of something akin to profound, visceral disgust darkening his already cold eyes. "There are places for women like you. Places where your unfortunate condition is better suited." Fear, as cold and sharp as a newly whetted knife, pierced through Julia's desperate attempts at composure. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably, hot tears welling in her eyes, blurring her vision. "I can still work. I need this job." Voice cracking with desperation. "I'll work harder. I promise." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound, utterly devoid of any mirth. "Oh, you'll work, girl. Make no mistake, you'll work. But not up here, not among the decent, productive women." His eyes narrowed, the iciness within them intensifying into a palpable threat. "Jeb tells me you've been slowing. Your output has decreased. Sharply, that won't do. That won't do at all." He rose, a tall, imposing figure, and slowly walked around the desk, his polished boots making soft, menacing thuds on the wooden floorboards. We have a special place for those who require extra motivation, a place where distractions are minimal and dedication is strongly encouraged. He gestured with a chilling flourish towards a heavy reinforced door at the back of his office. A door Julia had never seen. It opened a door that seemed to radiate a palpable bone-deep chill. "The cellar," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial sibilant whisper that made her very skin crawl. "It's where we keep our most valuable assets, and our most problematic ones. Consider it. Specialized housing tailored to your new needs." The world seemed to tilt sickeningly, the floorboards wavering precariously beneath her feet. The cellar. Terrified, hushed whispers about the cellar had circulated like a contagion among the women. Harrowing tales of unspeakable punishment, of unending Stygian darkness, of girls who went down and never came back quite the same. Their spirits irrevocably shattered, their bodies brutally broken. Martha had warned her, her eyes wide with a primal, visceral fear that Julia now understood, with chilling, immediate clarity. Jeb materialized at the office door, as if summoned by some silent, infernal signal, his considerable bulk filling the frame, a cruel, knowing smirk twisting his thick lips. Come on, girlie." He grunted, his large, calloused hand shooting out to grab her arm in a painful, vice-like grip. "Time for your new lodgings." A cruel chuckle, "You'll find the amenities. Basic." "No, please, no." Julia cried out, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, struggling futilely, desperately against his iron grasp, her pleas echoing hollowly in the opulent room. But Blackwood merely watched his face, an impassive, chilling mask of cold, calculated indifference. "You'll learn your lesson, Julia," he said softly, the very quietness of his voice somehow more terrifying than any enraged shout. "You'll learn that this world has no place for weakness, for sentiment. You'll give birth on the damp floor like an animal. And then, if you're still deemed useful, you'll work off your debt to me. Voice hardening. Every stitch, every breath you owe me." The cellar was a pit of abject despair, a man-made hell carved directly into the unforgiving earth. Dank, bitingly cold, it was filled with the suffocating, overwhelming stench of mildew, unwashed human bodies, and a hopelessness so thick it felt tangible. A single, miserably flickering oil lamp cast long, dancing, demonic shadows upon the rough, damp stone walls. Shadows that seemed to writhe and mock their suffering. Chains thick and heavily rusted hung ominously from those walls, their grim purpose chillingly, unmistakably clear. Other women were there, their frail forms huddled in the oppressive, stifling gloom, and their faces pale and gaunt, and their eyes wide with a disturbing mixture of stark terror and dull, soul-crushing resignation. Some were shackled directly to the walls, cruelly forced to work at crude, heavy looms, even in the near-total darkness, their hands raw and visibly bleeding from the coarse, unforgiving fibers. The air was heavy, thick, with the myriad sounds of their unending suffering. Quiet, choked sobs that were quickly stifled, the mournful metallic clink of heavy chains, the rhythmic, monotonous thud of the looms, like the captured, agonized heartbeat of some monstrous, tormented beast. "Welcome to the oubliette new blood," a hollow-eyed woman whispered, as Julia was brutally shoved towards an empty, desolate space, a length of cold, heavy chain cruelly clamped around her ankle, the unyielding metal biting mercilessly into her already swollen, tender skin. "Many come down. Few go up the same way they came in, if they go up at all." Another woman, chained nearby, her grime-streaked face etched with fresh tears, added in a barely audible murmur, her voice raspy from disuse. "Heard noises upstairs. Different. Like important visitors. Something bad is happening tonight. Always does when the moon is new and Blackwood gets that particular hungry look in his eye. Days blurred into a nightmarish, seemingly unending existence of unrelenting toil. Her already aching, heavily pregnant body was pushed far beyond its natural limits, each movement an agony. Her hands, unused to such rough, ceaseless labor, were soon rubbed raw, the delicate skin splitting and bleeding, making every stitch a fresh torment. Her feet, swollen from both the pregnancy and the penetrating bone-chilling dampness of the cellar, throbbed with a constant, agonizing pain that never ceased. The food was scarce, barely enough to sustain even a semblance of life, consisting mainly of a thin, watery gruel that did little to quell the gnawing, ever-present hunger that became her constant, unwelcome companion. Sleep offered only a fleeting, tortured reprieve, frequently shattered by the relentless cold and the searing pain, the unnerving scuttling of rats in the pervasive darkness, and the heart-wrenching stifled cries of the other unfortunate women trapped alongside her. Yet she swore she would not break. Not for herself, perhaps, for she felt her own spirit dimming, but for the precious, innocent life stirring within her. That tiny, persistent flutter of movement was her only solace, her secret, defiant rebellion against the encroaching darkness. Blackwood visited periodically, his mere presence a fresh wave of calculated, chilling terror. He would meticulously inspect their pitiful, inadequate work, his cold eyes lingering on Julia's swelling belly with a proprietary, almost gloating satisfaction. "Still with us, are we, breeder?" He'd sneer, his lip curling with unconcealed contempt. "Stronger than you look, or perhaps just more desperate." A dry, humorless laugh, that offspring better be worth the trouble you're causing. He offered no mercy, no hint of kindness, only the stark, brutal reality of her enslavement. The whip, often wielded by Jeb's meaty, eager hand, but sometimes employed by Blackwood himself for particular emphasis or sadistic personal pleasure, crackled through the fetid, stagnant air. A constant, terrifying reminder of their captor's absolute, unchallengeable power. Julia felt its searing sting more than once, the raw, burning welt that seared across her back, a fiery testament to this man's profound depravity. Each agonizing lash a further sickening descent into a living, breathing hell. She was just another forgotten girl, her fragile life a flickering candle flame in a cruel, indifferent world. Her only solace, the faint, reassuring movements of the life within her, a life she was desperately, fiercely determined to protect, even as her own spirit and body steadily, tragically faded. The sweatshop, this supposed frontier garment emporium, was nothing more than a cleverly, cynically disguised prison, a highly profitable, smoothly operating cog in a much larger, more sinister and far-reaching machine of human exploitation. Julia gradually learned from the hushed, fearful whispers of the other captive women that they were all ensnared, tragic victims of a cruel and sophisticated trafficking scheme. They had been systematically lured from distant, failing rail towns, from struggling, drought-stricken wagon camps, from lives already teetering on the precarious, desperate brink of utter destitution, by Silas Blackwood's silken, deceitful promises of honest, steady wages and longed-for security. Instead, they found themselves ruthlessly indentured, their meager, hard-earned earnings entirely consumed by fabricated, exorbitant debts for virtually inedible food and squalid, overcrowded lodging, their fragile hopes mercilessly extinguished in the oppressive, soul-crushing darkness of the factory and its horrifying, lightless cellar. Some, she discovered with a cold dread, had been trapped there for years, their spirits systematically, brutally broken, their bodies worn down to mere husks of their former selves. They were Blackwood's disposable, interchangeable workforce. Their silent, unacknowledged suffering, the very blood-soaked foundation of his ill-gotten, prosperous empire. Julia further discovered that some women, if they unfortunately caught a certain eye or outlived their practical usefulness at the relentlessly demanding looms, were coldly sold on to special clients. Blackwood carefully cultivated men who desired something far more illicit and depraved than just finely stitched garments. Julia clung with desperate tenacity to the flickering ember of escape, an improbable, almost fantastical dream that glimmered faintly in the overwhelming storm of her despair. But how chained constantly vigilantly, watched physically weakened by chronic hunger and unceasing debilitating exhaustion. What realistic chance did she truly possess? She prayed not to a benevolent, merciful God she no longer felt she truly believed in, but to any unseen force, any ancestral spirit, any entity that might possibly hear her desperate, anguished plea from the abyssal depths of this man-made hell. She prayed for her unborn child, for a future she could no longer clearly imagine for herself. Her screams when the agony became too unbearable, or the crushing despair too profound to silently contain, were pitilessly swallowed by the thick, unyielding stone walls, utterly lost in the relentless, monotonous hum of the machinery, whirring ceaselessly overhead, completely unheard by the oblivious world outside. Or so she tragically thought. Miles away beneath the vast, star-strewn canvas of the unforgiving, sprawling night sky, a different, far more potent kind of storm was ominously brewing. Running Elk, the revered chief of the Swift Arrow band of the Comanche, sat pensively by a crackling, spitting fire. His weathered face stern and deeply etched his dark eyes, reflecting not only the dancing, hungry flames, but also a deeper, much older fire of unresolved, profound grief and a righteous, fiercely burning anger. His people had long grievously suffered at the hands of the relentlessly encroaching white man, their sacred ancestral lands systematically stolen to their ancient cherished way of life, deliberately, methodically threatened with utter destruction. But the name Silas Blackwood carried a particularly bitter, venomous resonance for Running Elk. Years ago, long before Blackwood had ruthlessly built his oppressive empire of suffering in the rough settlement of Redemption, he had been a different, more cunning kind of predator. A duplicitous trader who dealt not just in common goods, but in precious human lives, in brutally stolen futures. Blackwood and his vile, merciless men had viciously raided a small, outlying hunting camp of the Swift Arrow. They had come silently, in the dead of night, like cowardly, slinking jackals greedily taking whatever they wanted. Valuable furs, strong, swift horses, and most devastatingly people. Among those cruelly taken were women and innocent children, ripped screaming from the protective embrace of their families, their subsequent fates unknown, a gaping, festering wound in the very heart of the tribe. One of them had been a vibrant young woman named Mourning Dove, swift and graceful as her namesake, with eyes that held the gentle warmth of the rising sun, and a spirit as untamed and free as the vast prairie wind. And with her, her infant daughter, Little Fawn, a cherubic child whose joyous laughter had been like the musical tinkling of a clear, cool stream. A sound now tragically silenced, a precious memory that festered like an unhealing wound in Running Elk's grieving soul. Running Elk had been a young, fierce warrior then, and Mourning Dove his beloved, cherished cousin. The devastating loss had carved a deep, jagged wound in his heart. A wound that the passage of time had not healed, only hardened into an unyielding, resolute vow of vengeance. He had obsessively tracked Blackwood then, but the man was as slippery and elusive as an eel vanishing, without a trace into the ever-expanding, lawless territories of the white settlers, leaving behind only a cold, frustratingly dead trail. For long, arduous years, Running Elk had carried this terrible, crushing burden. He had risen to become chief, leading his people through countless hardships and profound turmoil with sagacity and unwavering strength, but the haunting memory of the stolen ones of Mourning Dove and Little Fawn never once faded, remaining a constant, poignant ache in his warrior spirit. He had heard faint whispers carried on the shifting winds and by nervous, furtive traders of a white man named Blackwood, who had mysteriously grown rich and ruthlessly powerful in a rough, God-forsaken settlement called Redemption. A man who reportedly ran a large, successful garment business, a man whose notorious cruelty and absolute ruthlessness were spoken of only in hushed, fearful tones. Running Elk knew with a chilling, bone-deep certainty that settled deep within his marrow that this was undoubtedly the same man. The long, painful time for waiting for agonizing patience was irrevocably over. The restless spirits of his wronged ancestors cried out with insistent urgency for justice, for retribution. His warriors were ready, their hearts filled with the same potent, righteous fury that blazed within his own. This impending raid was not for plunder, not for fleeting glory. It was solely for retribution, for the anguished ghosts of the past, for the precious stolen lives that Silas Blackwood had so callously profited from and brutally, systematically destroyed. The thought of rescuing anyone else, let alone an unknown white woman, was the furthest thing from Running Elk's fiercely focused mind. As they rode swiftly, silently towards redemption, under the vast, watchful cloak of deepest darkness. His mission was singular, laser-focused, to confront Silas Blackwood head-on and watch his wicked, blood-soaked world burn down to nothing but smoldering ash. The mostly slumbering town of Redemption lay quiet when Running Elk and his 20 elite warriors approached, moving like silent wraiths through the tall, whispering prairie grass that closely encircled the nascent settlement. They were on foot now, having skillfully concealed their horses in a rocky, secluded ravine some miles back. Each warrior was expertly armed with a sturdy, reliable bow, a quiver brimming with sharp, precisely feathered arrows, and a razor-sharp, gleaming tomahawk that glinted ominously in the faint, ethereal starlight. Their faces were streaked with the grim, forbidding lines of war paint, stark declarations of black and red that unequivocally spoke of their deadly, unwavering intent. Running Elk moved stealthily at their head, his acute senses heightened to an almost painful, preternatural degree. His keen, penetrating eyes meticulously scanning every fleeting shadow, every darkened, silent window. He knew the precise layout of the Frontier Garment Emporium from diligently gathered meticulous scouting reports. A large main building flanked by smaller subservient outbuildings used for storage and raw materials. Blackwood, he'd been reliably informed by a disgruntled, bitter ex-employee, bribed with a few pieces of silver, often slept soundly in his heavily fortified office, situated within the main factory itself, a testament to his arrogance. They reached the dark, silent perimeter of the Emporium. A few dim lamps still burned fitfully within, casting a sickly yellowish glow that seemed to unpleasantly stain the profound darkness of the night. There were no guards posted outside, a glaring testament to Blackwood's supreme, unshakable arrogance, his deeply ingrained belief in his own complete invulnerability within the oppressive confines of his small, brutally ruled kingdom. Running Elk signaled silently, fluidly to his men. They fanned out with practiced, ghostly silence, as quiet as the whispering night breeze, swiftly taking up strategic, predetermined positions around the imposing building. His plan was brutally simple, yet highly effective. Create a loud, fiery diversion at one end of the compound, to draw out any internal security personnel, then strike hard, fast, and decisively at the main entrance. Find Silas Blackwood, and summarily end his vile reign of terror. A flaming arrow, its well-aimed tip, wrapped tightly in oil-soaked rags, arced gracefully, silently through the night sky, striking a vulnerable wooden outbuilding piled high with raw, highly flammable cotton bales and heaps of combustible cloth scraps. It caught instantly, greedy, hungry flames, licking eagerly up the dry timber, casting an eerie, dancing orange glow against the otherwise dark, indifferent sky. Shouts of immediate alarm erupted from within the main building. Several men, likely callous overseers, or a few hastily hired guards, stumbled clumsily out, their faces etched with genuine alarm and confusion, drawn inexorably towards the rapidly growing, fiercely roaring fire like moths to a deadly flame. This was the precisely awaited moment. Now, Running Elk grunted, his voice low and urgent, and his waiting warriors surged forward as one. They hit the main entrance like a thundering, irresistible storm, and their heavy tomahawks splintering the thick wooden door from its sturdy hinges, their fierce, blood-curdling war cries ripping savagely through the startled night air. A chilling primal counterpoint to the ominous, greedy crackle of the swiftly spreading flames. Inside, utter chaos erupted. The few men Blackwood employed as brutal muscle were caught completely disastrously off guard, some still bleary-eyed and disoriented from their abruptly interrupted sleep. They were no match whatsoever for the disciplined, righteous fury of the Comanche warriors. The acrid air rapidly filled with the ghastly, terrifying sounds of desperate struggle. The sickening, wet thud of bodies hitting the hard floor, the sharp, jarring clang of steel striking violently against steel, and the terrified, piercing screams of the factory women who had been sleeping on rough, uncomfortable pallets in a far corner of the main workroom, jolted awake into a living, terrifying nightmare. The acrid stench of burning cotton and something sickeningly metallic, fear itself, permeated the rapidly deteriorating air. A symphony of splintering wood war cries that thundered and the high-pitched shrieks of terror filled the expansive space. Running Elk moved through the ensuing melee with deadly practiced efficiency, his tomahawk a silvery lethal blur in the dim flickering light. From the growing blaze, his eyes constantly urgently searching for Blackwood. He spotted Jeb, the brutish, heavy-handed overseer, his normally cruel face now contorted with a desperate mixture of consuming rage and stark primal fear, attempting futilely to rally the pathetic, disorganized defense. Running Elk met him head-on, a fierce, brutally brief dance of deadly combat that ended swiftly with Jeb gurgling his last on the unforgiving floor. His inherent cruelty silenced forever, his wide, unseeing eyes staring up in disbelief. But Silas Blackwood was not to be found in the main room. He was not in his office either, though the lamp there was still lit, a thick ledger lying open on the massive desk, as if he had been abruptly interrupted mid-calculation of his blood-soaked, ill-gotten profits. The heat from the approaching inferno blazed on Running Elk's face. The outbuilding fire now raged uncontrollably, casting flickering demonic shadows that danced menacingly throughout the factory interior. Acrid, choking smoke was beginning to fill the air, stinging the eyes and searing the lungs, visibility diminishing rapidly. The factory women, terrified and utterly disoriented, were cowering in fear, some trying hysterically to flee into the chaotic, uncertain night, others simply frozen by abject, paralyzing terror. Running Elk's warriors remained focused on systematically disabling any remaining pockets of resistance, their primary target still the elusive Silas Blackwood. He had to be somewhere nearby. A surge of burning, intense frustration coursed through Running Elk. Had the cowardly, despicable snake somehow slipped away unseen in the swirling confusion? Then, amidst the deafening cacophony of the raid, the roaring, crackling fire, the guttural shouts of combat, the panicked, high-pitched screams, the brutal, sickening sounds of close-quarters fighting, Running Elk heard something else. Something distinct, a faint sound almost entirely lost in the overwhelming chaos, but one that somehow managed to cut through the surrounding noise with a chilling, piercing clarity. It was a woman's cry, but distinctly different from the panicked shrieks of the factory workers above. This was a cry of deep, profound agony, a desperate, broken sound that seemed to emanate eerily from beneath the very floorboards of Blackwood's private office. He paused, his head tilted, listening intently, every nerve ending alight. There it was again, weaker this time, almost a whimper, raw and heartbreakingly sorrowful. His warriors were still engaged diligently, flushing out the last pockets of tenacious resistance, systematically securing the rapidly burning building. His mission was Blackwood. But the sound, it tugged insistently at something deep, primal within him, an instinct he couldn't and wouldn't ignore. He moved swiftly towards the back of Blackwood's office, where he had noted the heavy reinforced door earlier during his quick initial search. It was bolted heavily from the outside. He noticed fresh, deep gouges around the thick iron bolt, as if someone had recently desperately tried to force it open. 2 feathers. Running Elk called sharply to one of his most trusted, seasoned warriors. Watch the main room. Blackwood may still be hiding like the cowardly rat he is. Two feathers knotted his eyes, fierce and alert. Running Elk turned his full attention to the cellar door. He could hear faint, desperate movement behind it, now a weak, shuffling sound. And then that heart-wrenching cry again, followed by a low, agonized moan. He put his powerful shoulder to the door. It was solid, clearly built to withstand significant force. He stepped back and delivered a powerful bone-jarring kick near the sturdy lock. The thick wood groaned and splintered loudly, but held firm. Another brutal kick delivered with all his accumulated strength and burning fury behind it, and the heavy bolt splintered with a deafening crack, the door flying inward with a resounding crash. A sickening wave of fetid, stagnant air, thick with the oppressive stench of sickness, utter despair, and unwashed humanity washed over him, making his hardened warrior's stomach clench with a cold, unfamiliar nausea. What he saw next made his very soul recoil. Several women were huddled in the oppressive, terrifying gloom, chained like animals to the damp, cold stone walls, their eyes wide with stark, uncomprehending terror, staring up at him like trapped, mortally wounded animals. And then his gaze fell upon her. Julia. She was lying almost lifelessly on the filthy, straw-covered floor, barely conscious, her frail body racked with violent, uncontrollable tremors. Her thin, tattered dress was torn and heavily stained with blood and grime. Her face, as pale as death itself, streaked with dirt and dried tears. Her breath came in shallow, ragged, almost inaudible gasps. Her hands were raw and bloody, her feet visibly painfully swollen and discolored. Even in the dim, flickering, hellish light filtering down from the burning factory above, he could clearly see the unnatural, pronounced curve of her belly. Pregnant. This woman was heavily, perilously pregnant. The other women in the cellar suddenly shrieked as flaming debris began to rain down from the rapidly collapsing ceiling above the narrow stairs. "The fire will burn alive down here." One cried out desperately, rattling her chains in futile, terrified protest. A cold, consuming rage, different from the righteous fury he felt for Blackwood, deeper and somehow more visceral, surged powerfully through Running Elk. What kind of soulless, despicable monster would subject any woman, let alone one so clearly vulnerably carrying a child, to this living, breathing hell? He took a deliberate step down the rough-hewn stairs, his moccasins utterly silent on the wooden steps. The other women shrank back further, their profound fear almost a tangible force. But Julia didn't move, her eyes fluttering weakly open, unfocused, filled with a pain that seemed to transcend fear itself. He knelt carefully beside her, his warrior's instinct momentarily giving way to a profound, unsettling sense of shock and something akin to a deeply disturbing, unfamiliar pity. He reached out a hesitant hand, intending merely to check if she was still alive. And as he gently, carefully brushed aside a matted lock of sweat-slicked hair from her burning forehead, his calloused fingers touched something unusual on her skin, just below the hairline near her temple. A marking, faint, almost invisible beneath the accumulated layers of grime and untold suffering, but definitely there. He felt a slight, distinctly raised pattern. His breath caught sharply, painfully in his throat. He leaned closer, his heart pounding a wild, frantic tattoo against his ribs. He knew that mark. He had seen it countless times before in his own village, on his own cherished kin. It was a small, intricate tattoo on the sacred, indelible symbol of the swift arrow band. A tiny, stylized arrow in swift flight, protectively surrounded by 3 distinct, carefully placed dots representing the sacred morning star. It was a tattoo traditionally given to all female children of his tribe. At birth, a permanent mark of identity, of belonging, of profound spiritual connection. He had a fleeting, achingly vivid memory of tracing that very same mark on an infant's soft brow, a tiny, perfect child. Mourning dove's precious child. There was something else too, a subtle but distinct familiar curve to her eyebrow, the unique way her long lashes fanned out against her pale cheek, even in this broken, unconscious state. a ghostly, heart-stopping, undeniable echo of Mourning Dove. His mind reeled, utterly stunned, his knees almost buckled beneath him, his vision momentarily blurring. It couldn't be. The child, little fawn Mourning Dove's beloved daughter. She had been a mere infant, barely a year old, when she was so cruelly, callously stolen. It had been so many agonizing years ago, nearly 2 long, grief-filled decades. Could this broken, suffering woman lying so vulnerably before him possibly be that lost, mourned child? The age seemed horrifyingly, tragically right. He looked closer at her features again, desperately trying to peer through the distorting mask of unimaginable, prolonged suffering. Was there truly a discernible resemblance to Mourning Dove beyond his own desperate, wishful thinking? It was so hard to tell for certain in these dreadful conditions. But the tattoo. A gasp caught in his throat. The tattoo was utterly, irrefutably, undeniably real. A sacred, indelible, unbreakable link. Little fawn. A powerful whirlwind of raw, conflicting emotions crashed violently through Running Elk. The raid, which had begun as a singular, clear-cut mission of righteous vengeance against an old, deeply hated enemy, had suddenly, shockingly, irrevocably transformed into something far more personal, far more urgent. This suffering woman, this tortured soul, was not just another nameless, tragic victim of Blackwood's endemic, widespread cruelty. She was one of his own cherished people. She was little fawn, believed lost, believed dead, for so many long, grief-filled, empty years. The precious daughter of Mourning Dove. His kin, his own blood. The staggering revelation struck him with the crushing force of a physical blow. The already intense rage against Blackwood intensified tenfold now, inextricably, violently mixed with a desperate, all-consuming, overwhelming urgency. He had to get her out of this hellhole. He had to save her. Revenge could wait. Or rather, revenge had just found a new, more profoundly personal, and infinitely more vital, all-consuming focus. Saving this precious life, the life of little fawn, and the innocent, vulnerable child she carried within her fragile womb, was now utterly, unquestionably paramount. She lives. Running Elk said, his voice hoarse-strained, spoken more to himself than to anyone else present. He looked up at the other captive women, their terrified faces now, a tortured, confused mixture of stark terror and a dawning, almost incredulous, fragile hope. "We will free you all," he declared, with unwavering conviction. He turned back to Julia, or little fawn, as he now thought of her with a fierce, almost painful surge of profound protectiveness. He spoke to her softly, tenderly, in the melodic Comanche tongue words she wouldn't consciously understand. But perhaps the gentle, soothing tone, the calm, reassuring cadence, would offer some small, desperately needed comfort in this fiery, chaotic inferno. "Do not fear. Voice low and resonant, I am here. I will take you from this place of shadows." He carefully, gently began to work on the heavy, cruel shackle binding her ankle. It was cruelly tight, cutting deeply into her swollen, discolored flesh. He used the sturdy butt of his tomahawk to pry relentlessly at the rusted lock mechanism, his powerful warrior's movements surprisingly deft and gentle. It took a few precious, agonizing minutes, the chilling sounds of ongoing fighting still echoing faintly from above, the suffocating smell of smoke growing stronger, more acrid, with each passing critical second. Finally, with a sharp metallic crack, the stubborn shackle sprang open. Julia moaned softly, a faint sound of relief, as the brutal, unrelenting pressure on her tortured ankle was finally released. He looked around quickly for something to cover her, to offer some modicum of warmth and dignity in this pit of utter degradation. He spotted a discarded piece of relatively clean sacking in a dark, shadowed corner, and draped it carefully, tenderly over her trembling form. Then, with a gentleness that starkly belied his fierce, renowned warrior reputation, he slid his strong arms beneath her, one supporting her trembling shoulders, the other cradling her knees, and carefully, almost reverently, lifted her from the filthy, damp, unforgiving floor. She was lighter than he expected, dangerously, alarmingly so. Her head lolled weakly against his broad shoulder, her breathing shallow, faint, and terrifyingly erratic. The others, she whispered, her voice barely audible, a mere thread of sound in the overwhelming chaos, her eyes fluttering open again, a flicker of defiant, stubborn consciousness, somehow returning from the abyss. Help. Them. We will. Running Elk assured her, his gaze sweeping compassionately over the other chained, utterly terrified women. He shouted up the smoky, narrow stairs in rapid Comanche. "Two feathers, broken hand. Come, there are more captives here, quickly." Two of his most trusted warriors appeared almost instantly at the top of the precarious stairs, their faces grim and hard as granite as they took in the horrifying, stomach-churning scene below. "Free them!" Running Elk commanded, his voice ringing with absolute, unquestionable authority. Quickly. The fire spreads rapidly. Every moment counts. Suddenly, a soot-stained figure stumbled awkwardly from a cleverly hidden alcove within the main office space, just beyond the now open cellar entrance. His eyes wild with a desperate mixture of sheer terror and the dangerous fury of a cornered, wounded animal. Silas Blackwood himself, a heavy pistol clutched tightly in his trembling, sweating hand. "Stay back, savage." He shrieked, his voice cracking with fear and rage, seeing Running Elk emerging from the cellar's billowing smoke with Julia held securely in his arms. "One more step, and the girl dies first," voice rising hysterically. "I swear it." He hadn't fled as Running Elk had initially wrongly assumed. He'd been hiding like the true coward he was, pathetically waiting for a chance to escape, or perhaps to inflict one last vicious act of cruelty. Running Elk instinctively, protectively shielded Julia's vulnerable body with his own, his intense gaze never once leaving Blackwood's terrified, hate-filled eyes. "Your reign of evil ends tonight, Blackwood. Here. Now." He declared, his voice a low, menacing growl. "I have friends in this town." Blackwood blustered, his darting eyes, glancing nervously towards the raging inferno, now consuming one entire end of the factory. The deafening roar of the hungry flames growing steadily louder, more menacing. "Men on their way. You'll all hang for this spitting with venom, you and your filthy squaw." He clearly knew of another hidden escape route, and was desperately trying to buy himself precious time. This was it. The final, inevitable confrontation. Blackwood fired wildly. The shot went wide, thudding harmlessly into the thick doorframe, as Running Elk moved with preternatural, astonishing speed, carefully but quickly setting Julia down against the relative safety of the cellar wall just inside the doorway, before lunging at Blackwood like a striking, enraged panther. The ensuing fight was brief, brutal, utterly vicious. Blackwood, despite his arrogant bluster, was no warrior grown soft and thoroughly corrupted by his ill-gotten, blood-stained wealth. Running Elk disarmed him with a swift, disabling blow, his tomahawk pressing cold and hard against the fiend's quivering throat. "Where are the others like her?" Running Elk snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The ones you stole from my people, from other tribes. Speak or die now." Blackwood, trembling uncontrollably, his face slick with cold sweat and abject terror, finally brokenly spat out, They paid well. For the strong ones, the exotic ones, for their private collections." He nodded subtly, almost imperceptibly, his terrified eyes darting towards a cleverly concealed false panel in his massive, ornate oak desk. "The big ledger. Details, names, places." Another ledger. More names, more places, more routes. A sickening, detailed map of a far-reaching, insidious human trafficking network. Blackwood wasn't just a local small-time brute. He was a key supplier, a vital depraved link in a vast chain of human misery that stretched malevolently across the entire frontier. Two feathers bind this filth. Running Elk commanded, his voice tight with utter contempt, and then carefully, tenderly scooped up Julia again. His keen gaze also falling upon the second ledger, two feathers quickly, expertly retrieved. He will not escape true justice, not from us, not from the avenging spirits. As his warriors systematically set about freeing the other terrified, traumatized women from the rapidly deteriorating, smoke-filled cellar, Running Elk turned and began to carefully carry Julia up the treacherous, smoky stairs. Emerging into the main factory room was like stepping directly into another kind of raging inferno. The outbuilding fire had indeed spread catastrophically, and now voracious, hungry flames were licking greedily at one entire end of the main wooden structure. The smoke was thick, acrid, dangerously suffocating visibility almost non-existent. The terrifying sounds of fighting had mostly died down. Blackwood's men were either dead, gravely wounded, or had cowardly fled into the chaotic, disorienting night. But the danger was far from truly over. Gunfire suddenly violently erupted from the direction of the town. Not just a few stray, panicked shots, but a more organized, determined, and alarmingly close volley. It seemed some of the townsfolk, or perhaps more of Blackwood's cronies and shadowy business associates, alerted by the massive visible fire and the terrifying, unmistakable sounds of the raid, were now attempting a desperate, furious counterattack. Arrows whizzed ominously past, thudding with sickening force into the wooden walls of the now fiercely burning factory. "We must go," Running Elk shouted, gathering Julia back into his arms more securely. "To the horses, move." The subsequent retreat was fraught with extreme peril. They were dangerously exposed, carrying a barely conscious woman, and desperately escorting a group of terrified, severely weakened former captives, many of whom could barely walk unassisted. The remaining warriors formed a courageous protective screen, returning fire with their deadly accurate bows, their swift arrows finding unseen targets in the swirling darkness, desperately trying to keep their determined attackers at bay. Blackwood, bound securely and roughly gagged, was unceremoniously dragged along a bitter, hateful, yet somehow satisfying trophy. Running Elk moved with surprising, incredible speed. Julia cradled securely, protectively against his broad chest. He could acutely feel the terrifying fragility of her life, the shallow, erratic, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her breathing against him. He pushed himself harder, faster, driven by a desperate, primal, overwhelming need to get her to safety, to preserve this precious, rediscovered life. They finally reached the secluded ravine where the horses were hidden. The other women, utterly exhausted and deeply traumatized, were gently helped onto the spare mounts or rode double with the stoic, vigilant warriors. Running Elk carefully, expertly mounted his own muscular, reliable war pony, settling Julia gently, securely in front of him, her frail body leaning heavily, almost lifelessly against his own. He wrapped one strong arm securely around her, expertly holding the reins with the other. "Ride," he commanded, his powerful voice cutting decisively through the surrounding chaos, and the Comanche party melted like shadows into the rapidly receding pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind the fiercely burning, collapsing factory. The lingering, sporadic sounds of distant gunfire and the shocked town of Redemption to inevitably deal with the smoldering ashes and the bitter, undeniable truths of Silas Blackwood's wicked, depraved enterprise. The arduous journey to the Comanche winter camp was long and exceptionally difficult, especially for the gravely injured Julia. She drifted precariously in and out of a raging, fevered consciousness, deeply tormented by excruciating pain and fragmented, terrifying nightmares that replayed her horrors. Running Elk rarely, if ever, left her side. He rode with her, cradled carefully, protectively against him, diligently shielding her from the worst of the harsh elements, his own powerful body, a resolute bulwark against the biting, relentless wind. When they made camp, he would gently lay her by the warm, crackling fire, ensuring she was kept warm, patiently, tirelessly trying to coax a few precious sips of water or thin, nourishing broth between her parched, cracked lips. His observant warriors watched him with a complex mixture of respectful curiosity, dawning understanding, and profound admiration. They knew their chief was a man of deep, unwavering loyalties and fierce, unshakable convictions, but this unprecedented level of profound, tender concern for a white woman, even one who now demonstrably, miraculously bore the sacred ancient tribal mark, was something entirely new, something that resonated deeply with their own ingrained sense of justice and inherent kinship. The incredible story of the sacred tattoo of the tragically lost little fawn had begun to circulate amongst them in hushed, awe-filled, reverent whispers. The Comanche women at the main camp, when the weary party finally arrived days later, were initially understandably wary, their weathered faces unreadable, guarded. This unknown white woman, looking more dead than alive, her belly swollen with impending child, was an unexpected, potentially disruptive, and certainly unsettling arrival. But when Running Elk patiently, earnestly explained, when he gently showed them the faint, yet undeniable sacred tattoo near her temple, a palpable murmur of utter astonishment, then dawning recognition, and finally profound, wholehearted acceptance rippled through them. Old Sky Woman, and the tribe's eldest, most revered healer, a wise woman whose ancient eyes held the accumulated wisdom of countless generations and the gentle, poignant sorrow of 1,000 moons, took immediate, decisive charge of Julia's critical care. "She is one of us," Old Sky Woman declared, her voice raspy but unmistakably firm, instantly silencing any lingering, unspoken doubts. "Stolen from us, but now graciously returned by the Great Spirit." The healing process was slow, agonizingly painstaking, a delicate, precarious dance between flickering life and encroaching death. Old Sky Woman skillfully used traditional Comanche remedies, potent poultices of carefully selected herbs to draw out the raging infection from Julia's festering, angry wounds, soothing, calming teas brewed from willow bark and fragrant prairie flowers to gently break her consuming fever, and gentle restorative massage with healing bear grease to ease the deep, persistent aches in her battered, starved, and grievously abused body. Julia hovered perilously in the liminal, shadowy space between life and death for many long, uncertain days, and even longer, terrifying nights. Vivid, terrifying nightmares plagued her troubled sleep. Horrifying visions of the cold, damp cellar, of Blackwood's cruel, leering smile, of Jeb's brutish, menacing grin, of heavy chains and whistling whips and endless, suffocating darkness. She would often cry out in her fevered delirium, her weak hands clutching desperately, unknowingly, at the soft, comforting furs that covered her frail form. Running Elk remained a constant, grounding, reassuring presence during those dark, terrifyingly uncertain days. He would sit patiently by her simple pallet for hours on end, sometimes just quietly watching over her with an unreadable, stoic expression, sometimes speaking softly, soothingly in Comanche. Not expecting her to understand the actual words, but hoping the calm, steady, melodic rhythm of his voice would somehow penetrate her troubled, tormented dreams, offering a desperately needed anchor in the violent storm of her shattered mind. He felt a profound, almost unbearable weight of responsibility for her, a deep connection that went far deeper than mere tribal kinship, deeper even than the shared traumatic experience of Blackwood's monstrous cruelty. He saw in her the lost, innocent child, the cruelly stolen future, the accumulated, immeasurable suffering of his entire people, embodied in one fragile, heartbreakingly broken form. And he saw, too, beneath the obscuring layers of agonizing pain and abject despair, a tiny, yet incredibly stubborn flicker of an indomitable, unconquerable spirit that steadfastly refused to be entirely, irrevocably extinguished. gradually painstakingly, under the patient, skilled, and tender care of Old Sky Woman, and the unwavering, vigilant, watchful eye of Running Elk. Julia slowly began to mend. The raging, consuming fever finally broke. The angry, infected wounds started to slowly heal the raw, damaged flesh, gradually, miraculously knitting back together. A faint, delicate touch of healthy color slowly returned to her pale, translucent cheeks. She began to take a little nourishing food, then cautiously more. She would silently watch the Comanche women as they moved gracefully about their daily tasks. Their movements fluid, practiced, and inherently purposeful. Their voices soft, yet surprisingly strong. Their laughter surprisingly frequent and genuine. There was an palpable sense of true community here, of deep belonging, of vital interconnectedness that she had never ever known, never even dared to dream of, in her darkest, most desolate moments. It was so vastly, so fundamentally different from the harsh, brutal, relentlessly solitary world she had so miraculously escaped. Her first coherent, conscious words were a softly whispered "Pia Apu," thank you, to Old Sky Woman, who smiled with genuine, heartfelt warmth. Then haltingly, she asked for Running Elk. When he came to her side, she looked at him, her eyes clear and lucid for the first time, in what felt like an absolute eternity, though still deeply shadowed with a haunting, indelible memory of her terrible ordeal. "You saved me," she said, her voice weak, but surprisingly steady, astonishingly strong. Questioningly, why risk so much for? For me, Running Elk sat beside her pallet, his very presence solid, immensely reassuring. He told her then, his voice low and somber, resonating with deep emotion, about the sacred tattoo, about her lost mother, Mourning Dove, about her own forgotten identity as Little Fawn. He spoke with quiet dignity of the devastating, unprovoked raid on his people so many long years ago, of the unbearable, gnawing loss, of the long, frustratingly fruitless search that had relentlessly consumed a significant part of his very soul. As he spoke, Julia listened intently, her expressive face shifting through a tumultuous range of emotions, from utter confusion to dawning, almost incredulous, staggering understanding. She had no conscious, tangible memory of her early childhood, of a Comanche mother, or a life before the grim, bleak succession of stark orphanages and harsh, cruelly exploitative employers that had constituted her bitter, sorrowful lot in life. But the tattoo was undeniably there, an irrefutable, indelible link to a forgotten past she never knew, and she had possessed a lost family she never knew she'd tragically mourned. A fragile yet profound sense of true identity began to take hesitant, tentative root within her deeply wounded psyche. She was not just Julia, the forgotten, cruelly discarded girl. She was Little Fawn, a true daughter of the resilient, Swift Arrow people. Hot, copious tears streamed unbidden down her face. Tears of profound, heart-wrenching sorrow for the lost mother she couldn't remember. Tears of overwhelming, immense gratitude for this unexpected, miraculous deliverance. Tears of sheer, unadulterated wonder at the strange, utterly unfathomable twists of cruel fate that had ultimately, improbably brought her here to this unlikely, desperately needed sanctuary. Running Elk let her cry his steadfast presence, a silent, unwavering, profound comfort, his own warrior heart aching with a complex, bittersweet mixture of deep grief for the irrevocable past and a dawning, fragile hope for the uncertain future. As Julia gradually regained her physical strength, her fractured spirit too began the slow, arduous, yet vital process of healing. The resilient Comanche people accepted her fully, not merely as an outsider or a rescued captive, but as one of their very own, miraculously, blessedly returned from a long and unimaginably perilous journey through profound, terrifying darkness. The women patiently, kindly taught her their melodic language, their intricate, beautiful crafts. The children, initially shy and deeply curious, soon flocked eagerly around her, inexplicably drawn by her gentle, quiet nature and the lingering, profound sadness in her expressive eyes that they somehow innately understood. She learned the ancient art of grinding corn into fine flour, to meticulously bead intricate symbolic patterns onto soft moccasins, to truly understand the subtle, sacred, life-affirming rhythms of a life lived in genuine harmony with the bounteous, unforgiving land. The constant, suffocating fear that had been her unwelcome, persistent companion for so terrifyingly long began to slowly, steadily recede, gradually replaced by a tentative, fragile, yet deeply cherished sense of inner peace. And then, one cool, crystal-clear night under a vast, dark sky, brilliant with a million distant, glittering stars, with the wise old sky woman and several other experienced, capable women attending her in a specially prepared sacred lodge, Julia gave birth to her child. A healthy, strong baby boy with a surprising shock of thick, dark hair and eyes that, when they finally opened, seemed to hold the ancient, profound wisdom of the old ones. She named him Taka, a resonant Comanche word meaning brave heart, for the extraordinary, miraculous courage he had undoubtedly shown by bravely surviving with her through so much unimaginable, unrelenting hardship. Holding her precious son tightly in her arms for the very first time, Julia felt a love so fierce, so profound, so utterly overwhelming. It seemed to instantly fill all the broken, jagged, empty pieces of her shattered heart, somehow miraculously making her whole again. This precious child, conceived in the terrifying depths of abject hardship, born into the warm, welcoming light of true freedom, was her steadfast anchor, her radiant hope, her entire, meaningful future. Running Elk was there, not present at the birth itself, as was strict Comanche tradition, but waiting anxiously, tensely nearby, his usual stoic, impenetrable demeanor, uncharacteristically replaced by a rare, undisguised display of palpable, unconcealed tension. When old Sky Woman proudly brought him the welcome news and reverently presented the small, tightly swaddled, precious child, a rare, genuine, heartfelt smile touched his lips, instantly softening the usually stern, harsh lines of his weathered face. He looked intently at the peacefully sleeping baby, then at Julia, her face visibly tired, but utterly breathtakingly radiant with maternal love. In that single profound moment, he saw not just the miraculous, improbable survival of the long-lost little fawn, but the powerful, defiant continuation of life itself. A vibrant, joyful affirmation against the terrible darkness they had both so profoundly endured, a sacred, unspoken promise of inevitable renewal and hope. Life within the embracing arms of the Comanche camp was a world away, a universe, apart from the unspeakable, nightmarish horrors of redemption. Julia, or Little Fawn, as many within the tribe now affectionately, warmly called her, truly blossomed. She learned to ride with the innate grace and unwavering confidence of a woman seemingly born to the saddle, to skillfully track game through the dense, challenging thickets, to intuitively understand the subtle, intricate living language of the vast, untamed wilderness. She discovered a formidable strength deep within herself. She never knew she possessed a profound, unshakable resilience, forged in the searing crucible fires of her immense suffering. Her deep, abiding bond with Running Elk steadily deepened, evolving naturally from that of rescuer, and rescued to one of mutual, profound respect, deep, unspoken understanding, and a quiet, understated affection that needed no overtly spoken words. He was her unwavering protector, her patient teacher, her steadfast, loyal friend. He patiently taught young Taka the intricate, time-honored ways of a Comanche boy. And Julia watched with a full, immensely grateful heart as her beloved son grew strong, fiercely free, and genuinely happy under the vast, protective, sheltering sky of the expansive plains. Yet even amidst the profound, enveloping peace and the wholehearted, unqualified acceptance of her newfound life, Julia would not forget The countless other women she had been forced to leave behind, the innumerable other suffering souls still tragically trapped in ghastly places like Blackwood's abominable factory. Their desperate cries forever unheard, their immense suffering, largely unacknowledged by an indifferent, often cruel world. The haunting, indelible memory of their pale, hopeless, gaunt faces, their broken, defeated spirits, their silent, unending, agonizing suffering relentlessly haunted her waking hours and frequently disturbed her troubled dreams. She knew with chilling certainty that Blackwood, despite his eventual capture and just punishment, had been but one malignant part of a much larger, more insidious, far-reaching network of evil, starkly revealed by that damning second ledger. The sickening thought that his nefarious partners, his callous suppliers, his depraved customers were still undoubtedly out there, freely perpetrating their monstrous cruelties upon other innocent victims, filled her with a cold, righteous, unquenchable anger. Her own miraculous rescue, her own hard-won precious happiness, felt tragically incomplete, almost hollow and undeserved, as long as countless others continued to endure what she had so narrowly, so terrifyingly survived. One tranquil evening, as she sat pensively with Running Elk by the warm communal fire, little Taka sleeping soundly and peacefully in the cradleboard, nestled safely by her side, she finally spoke of this gnawing, persistent unease. Her voice low but firm, infused with an unwavering, steely conviction. "There are others." She said, her gaze fixed on the mesmerizing dancing flames, but her mind's eye clearly seeing other, far darker, more disturbing images from her past. So many other women, other innocent children, even men still trapped in other dark cellars in other brutal towns, preyed upon by other vicious monsters. Men like Blackwood? A tremor in her voice. They are everywhere, like a relentless consuming plague. Running Elk listened intently, his gaze steady, unwavering, his expression deeply thoughtful, his silence conveying profound understanding. He recognized the burning fire in her eyes, the righteous, consuming anger that perfectly mirrored his own long-held, deep-seated grief and his insatiable thirst for true, lasting, meaningful justice. "What is in your heart to do, little fawn?" he asked, his voice, gentle but deeply resonant, carrying the weight of unspoken wisdom. "I cannot truly rest. I cannot find peace knowing they suffer so terribly," she declared, her voice gaining undeniable strength and unwavering resolve. "I was one of them. I know their fear, their abject despair, their utter soul-crushing hopelessness. Someone has to speak for them. Someone has to fight for them. If not me, who has seen the very heart of this darkness and survived, then who?" And so Julia, once the broken, terrified, pregnant girl mercilessly whipped in a hellish sweatshop cellar, began her profound, irrevocable transformation into Little Fawn, and the fierce, unyielding advocate, the Comanche woman who frees slaves. As she would eventually legendary come to be known in hushed, awe-filled whispers of both fervent hope and visceral fear. It started small, methodically, cautiously, with Running Elk's invaluable, unwavering assistance. The crucial damning information painstakingly gleaned from Blackwood's damning second ledger and the steadfast, courageous support of some of his most trusted, skilled warriors. She began to systematically gather more vital information, to painstakingly connect the disparate, shadowy dots, to meticulously map out the sprawling, clandestine network of human exploitation. They learned of other highly suspicious, isolated enterprises, other seemingly prosperous frontier businesses that appeared far too profitable for their visible, legitimate means, places where workers were rarely, if ever, seen in public, where dark, ominous whispers of severe mistreatment and unexplained, troubling disappearances circulated like a foul, insidious miasma through nearby communities. Her first major deliberate foray into this dangerous world was exceptionally cautious, meticulously, exhaustively planned. She, along with a few trusted warriors cleverly disguised as itinerant traders, visited a notorious, heavily guarded, isolated tannery, located many arduous miles away. A dreadful place from which few, if any, workers ever seemed to return, and whose brutal owner was explicitly named in Blackwood's incriminating ledger. Drawing heavily upon her own horrific, unforgettable experiences, Julia was able to instantly recognize the subtle yet chilling telltale signs. The abject, palpable fear in the haunted eyes of the few skeletal broken workers they managed to glimpse from a safe distance, the presence of heavily armed, menacing guards who watched their every move, the pronounced suspicious evasiveness of the owners when discreetly questioned about their reclusive, unseen workforce. They guard it like a veritable treasure vault, one young observant warrior noted quietly. Because the precious lives held captive within are indeed their ill-gotten treasure. Julia replied, her voice hard as unforgiving flint, her eyes glinting with cold, fierce determination. She couldn't simply storm the heavily fortified place, as Running Elk had so decisively, so effectively stormed the factory. But she could painstakingly, irrefutably gather damning evidence. She sought out and spoke to those existing on the desperate fringes. Disgruntled, fearful former employees who had somehow managed to miraculously escape its clutches, sympathetic, powerless locals who had long harbored grave suspicions but possessed no means or courage to act. She meticulously, carefully documented everything she found, her hand surprisingly steady, her unwavering resolve as solid as ancient rock. Then, with profound courage, she took her compiled damning information not to the often corrupt, callously indifferent local lawmen, but directly to a crusading, fiercely independent journalist in a larger, more established territorial capital. A principled man renowned for his fearless, uncompromising exposés of pervasive frontier injustices. It was a significant, calculated risk, but it ultimately spectacularly paid off. The journalist, immediately intrigued by her harrowing personal story and the compelling, undeniable evidence she courageously presented, launched his own covert, thorough investigation. The resulting series of powerfully written, widely circulated articles caused a massive, unprecedented public uproar, leading directly to official high-level inquiries by more honest, dedicated federal marshals, and eventually to the much-needed liberation of several dozen tormented men and women from the tannery's unimaginably brutal, inhuman conditions. This significant landmark success profoundly emboldened Julia. She became increasingly adept, more cunning and resourceful in her vital investigations, learning how to move discreetly through dangerous territories, how to expertly gain trust in perilous, volatile situations, how to skillfully piece together fragmented, whispered pieces of information into a coherent, utterly damning, irrefutable whole. Running Elk and his loyal, skilled warriors often provided crucial, indispensable protection and invaluable reconnaissance, their unique, formidable skills proving invaluable in the perilous, clandestine, life-threatening work she so bravely undertook. They were an unlikely, yet incredibly effective, formidable team. The stoic, wise Comanche chief and the determined white woman with a true Comanche heart and a resilient spirit, now united in their unwavering, righteous fight against slavery in its many insidious, multifaceted frontier guises. She went on to expose other hidden oppressive sweatshops, brutal, isolated logging camps, where desperate men were cruelly held in inescapable, crushing debt peonage, and even seemingly respectable, affluent households, where vulnerable domestic servants were treated as mere disposable chattel, their fragile lives subject entirely to the capricious whims of cruel, unfeeling masters. Her name, sometimes spoken simply as Julia, sometimes whispered reverently, as Little Fawn began to be uttered with fervent, desperate hope by the oppressed and downtrodden, and with growing palpable fear and deep-seated hatred by the cruel oppressors and exploiters. She faced constant escalating threats, undeniable danger, and open bitter derision from those who massively profited from such widespread systemic exploitation. But she never once wavered, never flinched, never considered abandoning her sacred mission. The indelible traumatic memory of the cold, damp cellar, of Blackwood's smug, cruel, unforgettable face, of her own harrowing near-death experience, fueled her relentless, unyielding determination. The profound, boundless love for her cherished son Taka, and the precious, hard-won freedom he so vibrantly represented, strengthened her unshakable, unwavering resolve. As for the villainous Silas Blackwood, his capture was not a quiet, clandestine affair. Running Elk, fully honoring the widespread grievous pain, and the man had inflicted a profound pain that extended far beyond the immediate suffering of the Swift Arrow people, brought him before a large, solemn, intertribal council. This was not just a council of Swift Arrow elders, but included grim-faced, vengeful representatives from numerous other tribes, whose names and stolen people were meticulously detailed in his own damning ledgers, tribes from whom countless women and innocent children had also mysteriously vanished over the long, painful years, their terrible fates previously unknown, their families left to endless, agonizing grief. Little Fawn, no longer Julia the helpless victim, stood tall, proud, and resolute before them, her voice clear, strong, and unwavering, as she recounted Blackwood's unspeakable atrocities in the dark, fetid cellar. Her powerful testimony emotionally echoed by the other brave women she had so courageously helped to free. The irrefutable damning evidence contained within his own meticulously kept ledger condemned him, further sealing his fate. The verdict was unanimous, the resulting justice swift, unsparing, and fittingly carried out by those who bore the deepest, most personal, and most grievous scars of his widespread, unimaginable cruelty. A stark, unpitying frontier reckoning under the vast, indifferent, watchful gaze of the timeless sky. His insidious evil was definitively, finally, irrevocably extinguished. His once feared name, now nothing more than a despised, whispered curse, carried away on the relentless prairie wind. Years passed, time flowing like a river. Taka grew into a fine, honorable young man, strong, brave, and highly skilled in all the traditional ways of the Comanche, yet also possessing his remarkable mother's keen, sharp intellect, her profound, innate empathy, and her unshakable, unwavering sense of intrinsic justice. Julia Little Fawn remained a vital, deeply respected, and cherished part of the Swift Arrow community. Her unique bond with Running Elk deepening organically into a true equitable partnership. Of equals, a quiet, profound, enduring love story. Written not in grand, passionate pronouncements or public demonstrative embraces, but in shared, knowing glances of complete understanding, unwavering mutual support, and a common, noble, selfless purpose. She never ever forgot her traumatic past, but it no longer defined her solely in terms of helpless victimhood. Instead, it became the inexhaustible, profound source of her extraordinary, inspiring strength, the deep wellspring of her profound, boundless empathy for all who suffered. She continued her vital, life-altering work, though its methods and focus evolved significantly with the inexorable passage of time and the constantly changing, challenging circumstances of the developing frontier. She bravely helped to establish a clandestine network of vital safe houses for escaped, desperate workers, diligently educated, isolated communities about the insidious, often hidden signs of human trafficking and ruthless exploitation, and advocated tirelessly, courageously for stronger, more just laws and their honest, consistent enforcement. She saved countless vulnerable women and men and innocent children from the very same unimaginable horrors she herself had so miraculously, so narrowly endured. Her lasting, profound legacy was not just in the specific individuals she personally heroically rescued, but in the crucial awareness she so passionately raised the potent seeds of vital change and enduring hope she so carefully, so lovingly planted across the hard, often unforgiving, brutal frontier. Sometimes, in the quiet, peaceful hush of the late evening, watching Taka expertly practice with his bow under the proud, approving eye of Running Elk, or intently listening to the wise elders tell their ancient, mesmerizing stories around the warm, crackling communal fire, Julia would instinctively gently touch the faint, faded sacred tattoo near her temple. It was a constant, poignant reminder of who she truly was and who she had powerfully, inspiringly become, Little Fawn of the Swift Arrow. A survivor, a devoted mother, a fierce warrior in her own undeniable right, a radiant, unwavering beacon of hope in a too often dark, cruel, and indifferent world. She had once been a terrified pregnant girl, brutally beaten and callously forgotten in a hellish sweatshop cellar, her desperate, anguished screams unheard by a callous, unfeeling world. But one man, on a deeply personal, consuming mission of vengeance, had miraculously heard those faint, desperate screams. And in unexpectedly finding her, he had not only providentially rediscovered a long-lost, cherished member of his grieving tribe, but had unwittingly, irrevocably unleashed a powerful, transformative force for justice that would continue to echo resoundingly across the vast plains for many, many years to come. Her remarkable life was an enduring, powerful testament to the incredible, awe-inspiring resilience of the indomitable human spirit. A poignant, unforgettable story of precious hope, miraculously, courageously snatched from the very abyssal depths of utter despair. A beautiful, powerful melody of true freedom, bravely, defiantly sung in a harsh, challenging land that too often prized cold profit far above precious people. The unexpected, profound connection forged in devastating chaos and purifying fire had brought not just mere rescue, but true, meaningful redemption. Not just for her, but for countless others whose lives she touched. And in that sacred, hard-won, immutable truth, Julia Little Fawn found a deep, abiding peace that was profound, lasting, and truly her own. A peace that whispered softly of a better world, a world where even the faintest, most desperate cry for help might one day finally, decisively be answered.